This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's May 20th, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortune. Shortly after the pandemic shutdowns began in the spring of 2020, management teams were estimating the times of mandatory telework periods and returns to office. It's easy to forget 15 months later, but there were offices that were promising a return to normal by the early parts of the summer of 2020. Then the 4th of July was a new target. Then the fall. Eventually, it just became TBD or indefinitely. Now, in the late spring of 2021, vaccination rates are rising, restaurants are reopening, and mask mandates are falling. So more offices are letting people back to the office, even if only in a hybrid telework in-office situation. But what are they coming back to when they come back to the office? Our guest today has a post on our site about the unhealthy work environments to which some may be returning. These workplaces may not be engaging or positive environments for the workforces in them. Managers may play favorites or not recognize good work. An unhealthy office with no connection culture is not one that employees want to return to. Michael Lee Stallard is a GovExec contributor and the co-author of the book Connection Culture, The Competitive Advantage of Shared Identity, Empathy, and Understanding at Work, now in its second edition. He has a post on our site right now headlined, Should You Bring Employees Back to the Office? After a short break, I'll talk to him about the return to offices and workplace culture, next on GovExec Daily, sponsored by Salesforce.
We live in an always-on world that creates demands for better experiences and interactions with government at all levels. For the public sector to best deliver on its mission, agencies and their employees need IT systems that provide analytical insights to drive decisions, improve work process effectiveness, and provide the best experience for their constituents. With Salesforce, you can rapidly transform the way you deliver government services through capabilities, solutions, and products that flex and scale to meet every need. Learn more about how Salesforce can help your agency adopt the capabilities you need to improve mission impact at salesforce.com/government.
American office workers are slowly returning to the workplace as more and more people are being vaccinated. The pandemic accelerated telework adoption, and lots of organizations are embracing a hybrid environment. But what makes people want or not want to make their way back to the office? What makes an office some place where people feel comfortable working? Joining our program today is Michael Lee Stallard, who co-authored the book Connection Culture, The Competitive Advantage of Shared Identity, Empathy, and Understanding at Work, now in its second edition. He has a post on our site right now headlined, Should You Bring Employees Back to the Office? He joins the podcast now to discuss the post and the return to workplaces. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Ross. I appreciate you having me.
People are probably going to want to have a hybrid situation when they're vaccinated and get the all clear back to offices. Why do you think that is?
Ross, most people like eliminating their commute to the office, first of all. And they also like the flexibility to be able to attend to personal matters, including taking care of children or elderly family members. Research also clearly shows that most work cultures are unhealthy. So people are not enthusiastic or engaged about working in the office.
Let's build on that a little bit. People do hate going to the office. I know I've talked to people who, friends of mine and in and around town who say that, the commute is one of the main things, but they just don't like going in. They don't like the pressures or whatever. Why is that? And what is the unhealthy aspects of such an office?
Well, you're absolutely right. More than 2/3 of people are not engaged in their work. In our work, we've found that it's helpful to think of work cultures as having two parts, tasks and relationships. And it's primarily the relationship part that's the problem. Most people feel disconnected from their boss and their colleagues at work because there's a breakdown in meeting the 7 universal human needs to thrive at work, which are respect, recognition, belonging, autonomy, personal growth, meaning, and progress. And I usually explain it this way. When you first start in a workplace, people don't know you, so you can't expect to get a lot of attention. But at a minimum, you expect that they'll respect you, that they, because you're a human being, that they're not patronizing or condescending or passive aggressive. And if they are those one of those things, then it's hard to thrive in an environment like that. But if they are respectful, then and you're there longer and you've had a chance to show what you can do, you start to expect that people will recognize that that somebody will say, wow, you're working hard and appreciate the quality of your work. If you don't get that, you can become insecure, and that can hold you back from thriving. And then as you're there longer, you develop friendships, people whose back you have, who have your back, and that is a sense of belonging. And that just helps us get through the difficult seasons in our work lives, or even our lives outside of work, having that belonging in the relationships. And then there's autonomy, having the freedom to do our work, personal growth, that we're in a role that's a good fit with our strengths, and it's not overly challenging so that we're stressed out, or under challenging so that we're bored. And then work that provides meaning and that we see progress in. So those are the 7 needs. People feel connected when those needs are met. And the most effective leaders are those who connect with people they're responsible for leading, and they're intentional about cultivating cultures of connection. I know I mentioned this on an earlier podcast, but one leader who comes to mind who's in the news right now is Dr. Vivek Murthy, the US Surgeon General. He cares about people and he cares about results. He's one of the leaders we profile in our book, Connection Culture, and we also profile Admiral Vern Clark, who is the 2nd longest serving chief of US Naval Operations.
Do people sort of know that they have an unhealthy workplace if they're in management? Because that sort of sets up my question of, how do you know if you're bringing somebody back into an unhealthy workplace too soon? And what are the downsides to doing that?
Well, 71% of people say they prefer a hybrid work arrangement where they work in the office some days of the week and remotely on other days. So if your organization doesn't offer that flexibility, you risk losing that talent to other organizations who do. And we're finding that more people are putting a higher priority on that these days. Some people will not want to return to the office environment that was stressful and disconnecting pre-pandemic after working remotely. They've enjoyed this experience to some degree, just having that flexibility, eliminating the commute and the other things we mentioned. So at least working from home, they didn't have to deal with the toxic relationships also. And it's an opportunity. I think this is a huge opportunity for organizations to really relook at the relational culture in their work cultures and do things better.
There is this telework conundrum for so many people. I know I had this conversation with some friends last week that it really does depend on the job, but commute is always the first thing everyone says, especially if you take mass transit or anything. But telework is great until it's your only option, is I think what a lot of us have learned over the last year, that you go a little stir crazy when you're staring at the same 4 walls. But the externalities of not being able to do other stuff like go to bars and restaurants or see your friends, I think probably contributes a lot to that. You mentioned the connection culture that you have written about a lot. So how can managers kind of, in bringing people back to the workplace, foster that culture to help sort of prop up the office environment and support the office environment?
Russ, we found that the most effective leaders, like Dr. Murthy or Admiral Clark, they cultivate a connection culture by communicating a vision that unites and inspires people, by valuing people as individuals and not treating them as mere means to an end, and giving people a voice to express their opinions and then considering their input. A good way to remember this is vision plus value plus voice equals connection. Really simple. And in connection culture, we write about the practices effective leaders implement. So for example, Dr. Murthy, and I know I've mentioned this example before on your podcast, but let me just bring it up again since he's very visible these days. He employs a practice called Inside Scoop that helps colleagues get to know each other. Here's how it works. At each weekly all hands meeting, one colleague would have 5 minutes to show a few photos related to their life and tell others about them. And over time, each participant took a turn. Dr. Murthy has said that he could see it improved collaboration and cooperation, and research supports that. It's consistent with the research by Professor Ashley Harden of Washington University, which we describe in the book. Her work has found that greater personal knowledge that we have of each other It leads to a more human perception of a colleague, which results in increased responsiveness and decreased social undermining, which social undermining is another way of saying backstabbing. So this is just one of many examples, but I think it's a very simple one that every leader could implement.
It seems like a lot of places are going to move towards a hybrid environment. That seems like the place in history we're at, both with technology and just how the flexibility, as you mentioned up top, is so valued by so many people. So, do you think that a workplace that is well versed and steeped in connection culture can flourish in a hybrid work environment?
Yes, I absolutely do. It's, a couple things to keep in mind. Because people are away from the physical workplace, they're going to have to be more intentional about cultivating connection outside of work. And we have seen over recent decades, in the 1990s, American self-identity made a historic shift where historically people's identity was more connected to their family and their community. But it shifted in the 90s to be more connected with the status of their employer and their job title. That's a big change. So they're really looking for more from work. And if they're working more remotely, they're going to have to be intentional about reconnecting with family and friends and developing those connections outside of work. Another important point, Ross, I want to make is that it's important to remember that being responsible for leading remote workers is that the effective leadership of people, whether they work on site or remotely, has to do more with observing good leadership practices than where the individuals are located. In fact, any work arrangement can engage people only if people are connecting. That's true because connection meets those 7 universal human needs that I described earlier. And the risk with remote work is that people are out of sight, out of mind, so leaders are less likely to connect. So I encourage leaders to make an extra effort to be proactive about reaching out to the people they lead so that they feel included in a connection culture. And be careful that you don't default to relying on the input of people who happen to be with you in the office. It's important to be inclusive with the people who are out of the office too.
Those are great pieces of advice, and hope that the people that are hearing this within our earshot will bring it forward. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thank you, Ross.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuna. We want to thank Michael Lee Stallard for joining the program. Our music is a song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. Now stay tuned for a message from our sponsor, Salesforce.
Hello and welcome. I'm Juliette Van Wagenen, editor of branded content for Government Executive Media Group's Studio 2G, and I'm sitting down today with Chris Radich, Vice President of Digital Strategy at Salesforce. Chris is going to share his insights into the growing world of cloud services, why agencies need to plan modernization efforts effectively in order to ensure they can get the most out of their investments, and how Salesforce can play a role in creating robust transformation strategies. Chris, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's get right into it. Why is it more important than ever that agencies look at modernizing their legacy IT systems?
Well, you look back in time and there was always this digital dilemma within government. There's a variety of reasons. I studied it in my previous role, wrote a report on the state of federal IT, but it feels different this time. It feels like COVID-19 has really been the number one catalyst that we've ever seen in terms of IT modernization, or even more broadly, digital transformation. And it's an exciting time to be an IT leader, to be a mission leader, because it's allowed for that change to happen more naturally. The challenge across government has always been some of the approvals, some of the compliance, maybe even bureaucracy. And COVID has changed the game from my perspective.
As citizens and employees are both looking for more digital experiences, where should agencies be focusing their energies?
The when you think of digital experience, it's such a broad priority. And it is morphed into this human centered design or customer experience priority. But you really have to narrow the aperture to become effective in driving results here. And the way I would describe it is you need to focus specifically on customer service and engagement, not just CX and human centered design. And this includes projects that can be implemented quickly, such as contact centers, single front door portals, and digital engagement channels.
Great. And so, how can Salesforce specifically help agencies to enable wholesale enterprise digital transformation and include, tools and services like those that you mentioned?
Well, our whole company's principle at Salesforce has always been to focus 100% of our energy around the customer and to build our digital transformations around that government customer. So whether it's a veteran or a farmer or a state or local resident, the customer is always front and center. And when you do that, you start to really identify it's all about improving services, integrating with legacy systems effectively, and providing ways to make data driven decisions at all levels. And we're leaders in all three categories in terms of customer engagement center, integration platform, and analytics and BI.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, thank you for joining me. And thank you to everyone listening to our podcast. To learn more, be sure to check out the Salesforce Public Sector Transformation Summit on Tuesday, May 25th. You can register at publicsectorsummit.com/register.